So Popeye, he's the latest character to go in the public domain, and there is a slew of Popeye horror movies coming up from low budget indie film studios. We are talking Popeye's Revenge. And this is a low budget British movie. There's a lot of people involved here from the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey movies, although I don't think this is part of that sort of official Poohverse reality, so to speak. But there are some familiar players here. And, you know, we've spoken about low budget British horror before, many times on this channel. So let's discuss the plot here. Right. This focuses on a group of young people going out in the woods and staying in this old dilapidated house in the woods that they intend to kind of do up. And they're chased around by a killer. There you go. That's like the plot of every single one of these movies. To give you a little bit more meat on the bones, there is a bit of a backstory about Popeye as a child, bullied because of his deformities, and you know, he supposedly drowned in this lake, and now he is out for revenge, as the title suggests. And these group of friends are here to kind of do up his old property, and you know, he wants his pound of flesh, not just spinach. So let's talk about the positives of this film. What works in this film? Now, this is, as well as obviously being about Popeye, I think this is clearly influenced by Friday the 13th, because it has a very Friday the 13th style vibe to it, if that makes sense. Now, you almost have, you know, we've got this guy who is supposedly sort of drowned in this lake, and now he's come back as a slasher, wanting revenge of those who he deems that have wronged him. We've got this, you know, the group of young adults / teens out shagging for most of the movie, who end up coming croppers. And we've even got a very similar kind of musical kind of similarity here from the Friday the 13th movies. So it's like a kind of a low budget, you know, Jason Voorhees movie, but with Popeye instead of good old Jason. So, you know, if you are a fan of that sort of thing, then this may appeal. It's a relatively high body count. What legitimately can I say that works in this film? I do think, even though the soundtrack actually is quite, you know, riffing on the Friday the 13th, I didn't actually mind the kind of the musical score, not as much of it, but what we did get, I actually didn't mind, to be fair. I think it was relatively effective. I'd also say there are some genuinely quite good sequences of cinematography here. One of the kind of things that have been added to the Popeye mythos is whenever he's around, there is a fog that follows him, and it all looks mysterious. And there are a couple of decent shots where there's kind of like fog on this lake and fog kind of coming through the trees and things like that. And you know, I mean, it's obviously just a kind of dry ice machine with someone there wafting it around. But I gotta say, I thought there are some kind of shots that I actually kind of did quite like, to be fair. And I thought actually did look pretty good, especially in the beginning of the movie when we kind of get our sort of setup kills with kind of Danielle Scott, who is like been in absolutely tons of these sort of movies. So it's, you know, there are some sort of competently put together kind of sequences. I actually gotta say, for a idea for a sort of slasher, I think a Popeye character that has these genetic mutations probably wasn't a bad way to go to kind of make, you know, explain his kind of like sort of differences to a kind of regular looking human, I suppose. I think that was probably the best option here. You know, so I actually didn't mind that, and I actually think in a way it's more interesting having a human killer to a sort of, you know, a Winnie the Pooh style killer, because it's almost a little bit more you know, a little bit more kind of grounded in almost, well, you know, as much as like you can be in these sort of things, but it kind of makes sense a little more in a way. So there was that. They do try to include, you know, him on a boat, him eating spinach. We've got olive oil in it, so there is some kind of references to obviously the sort of the Popeye, you know, character up until this point. And as I said, there's a relatively high body count, and even though a lot of the kills are reaction shots, there are still actually a couple of, you know, low budget kills that are relatively interesting. There's one actually that's kind of quite reminiscent of a very famous scene from Zombie Flesh Eaters, which I thought was quite cool. Okay, so let's talk about what doesn't work. Let's talk about a few minor things first of all, then we'll kind of get into more of the more major issues. So just a few minor things here. I mean, we have a very long extended sequence giving us the kind of the backstory of, you know, what happened to Popeye, you know, as a kind of as a character. And it's kind of like a, you know, he was bullied, you know, like I said, a bit like a Jason Voorhees style character. It goes on a little bit too long, I have to say. And then we learned that Popeye was kind of, you know, supposedly drowned in this lake whilst he was a child with all this kind of sailor garb on. But as an adult, somehow he's magically got adult size sailor garb on. Where did he get that from? Who knows? You know, there are some, you know, Popeye is a character that in the cartoons and stuff speaks quite a lot. He has quite a distinctive kind of like personality. None of that's here. You know, it's really sort of just, he's a killer that kind of looks a little bit like Popeye. Olive Oil, they've got this actress who's got the most horrendous wig on. Why don't you just I had a look at this actress? She's got different colour hair, which is why I presume they've got this wig. Why not just have someone with dark hair? I mean, you know, why put this awful wig on this woman? So there's a few like little silly, you know, just kind of like crappy elements here. What are the kind of the more fundamental things? I mean, it's just a sort of cookie cutter, lackluster, boil in the bag. We've seen it all before. Oh, young people going to a you know, a house mostly female, you know, having sex, etc., getting chased around, yada yada yada. It's like every single one of these kind of low budget British kind of slasher movies. It's the same plot, more or less. In a way, the actual intro and the kind of the setup would have been a more interesting story. And I think this is a movie that obviously this is as many of these sort of British films, they take themselves quite seriously. I mean, could they have done something different with it? Could they have maybe make it a little more campy, a little bit more of a horror comedy? That may be a way to get, maybe, you know, it would have distinguished itself a little bit differently from the plethora of other films like that. Or maybe have a little bit of a different tax, like maybe Popeye doesn't realise he's being, you know, he's so strong and stuff because he's got this kind of genetic mutation. He accidentally kills people and he's almost like a tragic figure, like kind of Frankenstein's monster to a degree. And maybe he could have been like that, but no, it's just a sort of standard slasher. So it's all very, very sort of standard stuff. As I say, and the killer could really be anyone. I mean, it's just like Popeye in sort of name only. And how many? I mean, it's just all these public domain sort of characters come up, and there's a few more that are coming up within the next sort of 10 years. You know, James Bond, Superman, they're all coming up within the next 2 years. Well, sorry, 10 years, along with the others. And it's like, are we just going to go through these and have slasher versions of all of these? I mean, let's do something different. I mean. Anyway, and it's just like, oh, it's just so like lazy and quickly produced and cheap. Let's talk about the kills. Now, I've mentioned that there are a reasonable amount of body count here. But what this film does, and I think it's assuming this is a budgetary reason, it's lots of kind of like, oh, you know, we've got, for example, a woman caught in a cage, and there's got like a sort of like an industrial combine harvester or kind of like lawnmower type thing, and you know, it's going to basically chop her up. But what we get is her going ah with blood coming up and then blood splashing on the Popeye character rather than kind of seeing it all. So they haven't got, like, you know, you couldn't make this kind of like fake body that gets chewed up in it or something like that. You know, it's very much just sort of like the reactions to it and stuff, and that's when we do see kills. That's kind of what it is, and again, I'm presuming this is like a low, because it's low budget and somewhat quickly produced, probably in a matter of a couple of days. But that's what you get. I mean, there's nothing really here that's going to stand out, even though I think some of the kills in conception are relatively brutal. So, you know, there's that. The human sort of characters, I mean, they're completely forgettable. Of course, we have the good girl who you know is going to be like the final one and stuff. Everyone else is just a kind of like vapid, narcissistic sort of style stereotype that is just like complete cannon fodder. And they have, you know, there's quite a lot of kind of, oh, you're cheating on my boyfriend, sort of, who cares, sort of style conversations that obviously are there to kind of pad out the runtime and stuff, and it's just like, no one cares. Yeah, so it's just more of the same. Offers nothing new. I mean, at least with, like, I mean, I watched a Mickey Mouse one, which name escapes me, but it was, at least it had a little bit of randomness and kind of like craziness to it that I kind of like, you know, it had a little bit of its own identity. This one is completely forgettable. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.